Hello there. Welcome, especially to you African American millennials. It is a great honor and my privilege to chat with you about a topic you probably never heard about. You never heard it from your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, even your ministers. I don't think anyone probably have ever talked to you about it. I know while I was a young person, even a millennial, though it's hard to believe when you look at me, nobody ever spoke to me like this. Well, no, since nobody ever did it in my life, and believe it or not, I wasn't always talking to millennials, and I wasn't talking to any African Americans. I was brought up in the time when we were a totally segregated society. If I went into a movie, the black people were upstairs, the white people were downstairs. If you went into a restaurant, the white people were in their restaurant, the black people were in theirs. Totally different, totally separated. And I didn't know a black person most of my growing up years, except in a restaurant that my mom and dad would take us to every Sunday. And that was a black waiter who began to know us as a family, called me Earl, called my younger brother Jerry, but the only one I ever knew until I got on a train out of Central Station, Grand Central Station in New York City, going up to the Great Lakes, going into boot camp for the United States Navy. And as I got on that train, I was shocked. Across the aisle, there were kids, didn't look like me, didn't dress like me, and their skin colors were black, brown, yellow. It was kind of a shoulder-shaking experience, not knowing what to do. So I walked across the aisle, put out my hand to the first guy and said, "Hey, my name is Earl. What's yours?" And he said, "Well, I'm Max." "Well, Max, what do you do?" And he said, "I'm a farm boy." "A farm boy?" I came from a big, big city, and I'm saying, "What do you all do, Max?" He says, "Oh, I milk cows every morning before I go to school." I said, "That's strange. By the way, Max, have you graduated high school?" "No." And I looked at the other guys down and I said, "Any of you graduate high school?" Not a hand went up. And I said, "Hey guys, I'm in my second year of college. I just finished my second year." And they looked at me like, "Huh? Who is this guy?" Well, that is the start of my Navy career. And I'm going to summarize that. It has taught me more things than I ever would have expected. I was all of 17 years old and I thought I knew everything there is to know. I soon learned out I knew zero, zero. But those lessons that I've been taught through the experience of fighting in a war in the South Pacific have taught me never quit, never give in, never surrender. And ladies and gentlemen, if I've enjoyed any success over my long life, and I want to explain, I am 93 years old, and as I just mentioned, a World War II United States Navy veteran assigned to the Special Forces of working with the Marines because the Marines did not have hospital corpsmen. And few of us that were hospital corpsmen were picked out of the crowd and selected to be the corpsmen working with the Marines. So on every mission, the corpsman would go in. I would be about 8 to 10 feet behind them, hiding low on the ground because the Japanese knew if you took out the corpsman, you're literally killing 10 other Marines. Well, if I ever heard the word doc, that meant, Earl, grab your satchel and get over to this place and see if you could help this guy. And lessons I learned not while I was in the States being trained to be a hospital corpsman became real, and they still affect me to this day. Unfortunately, at this age, 2 years ago, I started to faint. I faint if ever I see something that is a calamity. A little girl riding on a bike happens to fall over and gets hurt. And thoughts run through my mind, running over to a military guy, best trained, toughest looking guys you could imagine, bleeding to death from a wound, or knowing there's not much I could do to help except give him a shot of morphine, look up to the sky, and pray, God, take him safely. But I can never forget some of those scenes that have taught me how to be a better person. I'm not bragging now, but I started my career in the Empire State Building, 34th floor, in the advertising agency business, because I knew technologically I was a nothing. I knew one thing that I could do well, and that was to run races that are long distance. I knew very well, because when it came to the Navy, we would be put to run a 2-mile, what they call around the grinder, with our Quonset huts are all stationed, and they'd ask us to put on 20 pounds in a backpack and see who can get around the fastest. And much to everybody's surprise, little old Earl would beat them all. And they would always say, what, did you cheat, Earl? Did you run across the grinder, or did you run behind it to get here first? And the officers would say, right from the beginning, we saw one guy shoot out from the pack, and we watched him. He would be picking up 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards. He had you lapped, and he came in 5 to 6 minutes before any of you. Well, you can do exceptional things if you work hard enough and train hard enough. So let me very quickly give you a little bit of an idea of me. I'm not bragging about it, but I think you need to know that from a very early stage, when I moved to Houston, Texas, I was invited within the first 2 to 3 years to become the chairman of the Anti-Defamation League. And not very long after that, I received a phone call from the NAACP, which I hope most of you African Americans know who they are. And they held a special meeting for me, and they gave me an award as the first Caucasian fighting discrimination against African Americans. And that was the start of a long career of trying to serve others. And how did that begin? One day I was 8 or 9, and I hear the words moral code. So I go running into my mom and I say, Mom, what is a moral code? Is that when the FBI talks to other Secret Service people on the telegraph machine and said, we've got some code to talk about? And my mother started to laugh and said, Earl, that's not a moral code. A moral code is an idea you put into your mind, into your heart, and into your soul of how you are going to be a better person. Mom, do I have a moral code? She said, Earl, go into your bedroom, think about it, and then after you come up with your moral code, come running back in and let me share it. So I did that. And I don't know how long it took, but I wrote a couple of words down on a piece of paper, ran back into the kitchen. My mom was sitting around the table, and I said, Mom, I've got my moral code, but it's only 6 words long. Earl, don't worry about that. It doesn't matter. What is it? And I said, number one, love God. Number two, make friends. Of course, I wanted to play ball and have a lot of friends to do it with. And number three, Mom, is to serve others. My mom looked at me, got up out of her chair, threw her arms around me in a tight hug, put her head with her mouth right into my ear, and whispered, Earl, I love you. Don't you ever dare to forget your moral code. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we all are going to make mistakes in life. There are temptations you want to take advantage of. But every time the temptations lured closer and closer, I heard Mom whispering into my ear, Earl, don't you ever dare forget. And there would be times, and I'll use this as an example. I was very trim from all that running. I thought I was fairly handsome. And nurses in the hospital would come up to me, and they are all officers, and I was an enlisted man. And they would say very quietly, Earl, would you want to go to a movie with me? And I would look at these girls, extremely attractive, very, very smart, and all very, very sweet. And I would say, well, thank you for the invitation, ma'am, but you're an officer. I'm enlisted, and we're not allowed to do that. And the answer always would be, don't worry about it, Earl. I'll get into my civilian clothes. You wear your uniform, and we'll be okay. And I would still answer, I'm sorry, ma'am. I appreciate the invitation, but I can't do it. Well, is there a reason, Earl? And I said, yes. I took a vow with my girlfriend that if I come back not injured, safe and sound, we will get married. And they looked at me and they said, Earl, we don't know when we're going to be returning. I said, well, a vow is a vow. And I just don't feel comfortable breaking it. Well, there were a couple of times I said, hey, dummy, wake up. But dummy just kept the vows. And when I did get home, there she was waiting for me. In the interim, while she was in college, her roommates and her sorority sisters said, Natalie, you need to run to see whether you can be Miss New York. Sure enough, I wasn't aware of it. I'm overseas in the South Pacific, and she became Miss New York City. Not only because she looks beautiful, but she can sing. And the agents from Hollywood kept running over and saying, well, Natalie, you can sing better than Grace Kelly, and you look much better. You will make a fortune. Please, let us be your agent. And she said, let me think about it. She went home and she called my mom and dad. And she said, could I come over and visit with you? And they said, of course, Natalie. She came to the house and she explained what had happened. And both my mom and dad said, naturally, who else would become Miss New York? Nobody is prettier. Nobody is sweeter. And nobody can sing like you. Well, then my dad said, Natalie, you know Earl's moral values. Would he be happy with you in Hollywood? And she looked at him and she said, I'm going to turn them down. And don't think I didn't realize when I heard about it, that took a lot of courage. What young girl that's attractive, that has a talent that people love, would turn down an opportunity just to know that her boyfriend is overseas waiting to come home? And when he gets home, they'll keep their vows to finish 2 years of college and then get married. And it is now 72 years since we've been married. And only this morning, ladies and gentlemen, Natalie's doctor called, because I have to share this with you. For the past year and a half, she has been confined to a hospital with something that is, you may not be familiar with it. It's AFib, and your heart beats very, very fast, and it affects her stomach. She can't breathe. She can't go to the restroom. There are so many things that are ailing her. She's constantly throwing up. Well, she spent some time in the hospital. They sent her home. And just before I went on the air, the doctor called and said, Natalie, you must rush to the hospital. We've got to examine you immediately. I called the station and said, I might have to quit the show. This is more important. But I then made a phone call to a neighbor who lives in our apartment building. And I asked Mary, do me a favor, please. Could you take Natalie and run her over to the hospital? And Mary quickly ran upstairs, put Natalie into a wheelchair along with her caretaker. We have caretakers around the clock, and they're off to the hospital, and I don't think they are there as yet. So if I break down during this show, it's not because I don't think you're listening to me, but I'm under a mental strain, only praying, wishing, hoping that maybe there is a cure to make this wonderful lady come back into my life and to share, well, I can't say beauty any longer. The disease has changed her face, certainly changed the wrinkles on her face, and the color of her blonde hair, as white as mine, and her body no longer shapely. It's just thin, worn down looking. She can't eat. So how is any meat going to stay on her? When I look at her, it takes effort to smile and greet her and give her a brief kiss on her forehead. Well, life is different. But because life is different, I think I'm capable of telling you a story today that I don't believe you've ever heard it from your mom, from your dad, from your grandparents, your best friends, or your minister. I think it is going to be particularly for millennials that are African American to be important. Well, now, if you listened to last week's show, you know I started by reading President Obama's personal letter to me. It started with thanking me for my service and then for writing to him my ideas how to get veterans into the University of Texas school college system at less cost and making it easier for those young men and women. And he was kind enough to not only write me, but to express his thoughts about how together we can make America a more prosperous and better nation. Only a year ago. Well, now I'm going to tell you a story that relates to what has happened with Natalie. Our children are spread all over the United States, particularly our grandchildren. They live in every place from Florida to Colorado to Washington, D.C. And one of our grandsons lives in Colorado because he too was a long distance runner. I shouldn't say was. He followed what I was doing all of my life, running 8 miles every morning before going to work, 8 miles every night before going to bed, and on Saturdays getting into an airplane and going someplace in the world to compete against other marathon runners. And that's what this grandson has decided to do. And moving to Colorado, where the air is cooler, even though it's much higher, that's where he is. And much to my surprise, the doorbell rang 2 days ago, just 2 days ago. I opened it up and I'm shocked to see this tall, handsome, trim looking young man, my grandson Bobby, who had flown in unexpectedly to visit with his grandmother. And I let the two of them talk for most of the day. And that was better medicine for Natalie than all of the medicines, all of what the 5 doctors are trying to do. Just having her grandson giving up his time and taking the effort to fly from Denver, Colorado to Houston, Texas. It's a little miracle. And we all can perform little miracles if we will put our mind to it. Well, what happened? It came late and he had to get back to Denver because he's working. And it's a very unusual job. A job you wouldn't expect of a college graduate who is extremely literate. He works in construction. And you know those big yards that we have to have in front of Costco and Walmart and other stores? That's his job. He has a crew of 30 to 40 immigrants that chop up the old concrete, tear it up, and replace it with new concrete. And Bobby Lipman is out there 5 in the morning, every morning of the day, even before the crew comes in, setting up all of the concrete bags and making sure they have enough water and other things and equipment. And they work very diligently and very hard. And he can speak to them in their language, which is usually they're from Mexico or South America. And they love him, and he loves them equally well. They are brothers working together in a tough job. And he sneaked away just over the weekend so he could visit with his grandma. And when he left, in order to make his plane back, I went down with him in the elevator just to thank him and give him a hug and said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. He walked over to his car, turned around, and stood up as tall as a Marine, lifted his hand up to me, gave me a salute. I, in turn, saluted him, and I said, "Have a good flight, Bobby." Well, now this is what is so surprising. The very, very next morning, I go to my computer, and I read an email marked October 26th. That's Monday. He left Sunday evening, and the email is marked October 26th, 11:59, midnight. And it says, subject, a preview of our meeting, referring to his visit. And it starts off by saying, addressing actually saying that he reads my weekly or daily little emails, pod broadcasts, and so forth. And he says, absolutely beautiful writing. I am honored and grateful to be able to call you my grandfather. Thank you, Earl. Thank you for your tireless efforts and always envisioning a future with increasing prosperity and then helping to actually deliver it. Your track record speaks for itself in multitudes. You are a messenger sent from above. The truth you write is so compelling that it brings me to a place of near tearfulness, both for the authenticity of the messages and the brilliance of its immutability. Thank you, Earl. Thank you so much for having grown wise in your age. Although only years reflect age, your vitality in all aspects is both a miracle and a blessing, but is without surprise given the life you have lived. You, Earl, are the reason why young men such as myself have faith that greatness is set to endure forever. The life you have lived and continue to love reflects perfectly what it truly means to back words with actions. You are the grandest example of how living a life built upon the virtues of hard work, dedication to a great cause, and abounding love for their neighbor is not just a noble cause worth pursuing. And it is not just a cause reserved for the select few. No, what your life reflects is how the greatness in words and deeds meet by people willing to take action, even if they did not initially believe is the path we must all take if we wish to heal and elevate ourselves to new heights. We talk about healing as if it's some high-minded principle that is without attainment. But healing is found on a daily basis in the communities we all live within. The healing only comes with the acceptance of the idea that no singular entity can fix a problem, and that our answers lie alone in our relations toward one another. You ask, quote, what will it take to heal? It is simply to say, yet difficult to live, and it is that we all have a sacred obligation to live out the following. We must prioritize consistent acts of goodwill towards our fellow man. This must also be done with our earth on a daily basis. We must accept that our differences are gifts from God, shared with us so that we can understand Him more completely. To love our differences is to see God in His fullness. We must all take ownership of choosing daily actions that lead us to nobler and more just causes. Our nation is built one community at a time. To all of the men and women on this chain, know one very important thing about Earl Lippman. Earl Lippman is not just a leader of men. Earl Lippman is a leader of nations. Because this man is armed with eternal truth, his message will be known to many. In this election season, it seems like there are a lot of messages being thrown around in every direction. Let me give you one of the most beautiful ones shared with me that I learned from watching the life of this 93-year-old World War II veteran, husband to a remarkable woman in Natalie Jacobson, now Natalie Lippman, father to 3, grandfather to countless, great-grandfather, son of an American success story, advertising legend, elite endurance athlete, public servant, lover of all, and a son of the Most High God. Earl, thank you. One of the messages that once echoed in your hallways was as follows: hope. Give the people something great to aspire towards, a vision that they can hold, love, and cherish. And I can promise you this: doors are going to open which we never dreamed possible. Opportunities are going to be more plenteous than at any point in our nation's history. Like life-altering connections and relationships will sprout in such abundance that every person in this country and outside of it as well will be better because of it. We will step into a nation of increase, a nation of love, a nation of wholeness, a nation of acceptance, a nation of virtue, and a nation which knows no boundaries, because it knows that the great bounty we will reap with the coming season will multiply itself over tenfold with the following year. And the following year, it will multiply tenfold once more, to repeat ad infinitum. Our lives will be marked by increase. Much love to you, Earl. Thank you so much for your work. You are truly one of the most incredible people I have ever been blessed to know. Your grandson, Robert Lippman. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't read that to sound and prove boastful. I read it because I doubt too many parents or too many grandparents ever get a letter like that, which brought tears to my eyes even before I wrote my response to Bobby. The lesson I learned from it was when we go through life, we don't realize people are watching us, what we're doing, how we are behaving. Are we keeping our moral code of loving God, making friends, and serving others? And what Bobby pointed out in my letter, just from a grandfather that didn't always live close to me in Houston. Most of his life and his brother's adult life and their parents were in Louisville. Yes, in Kentucky, not here in Houston. But Bobby, like maybe others, watched the seeds I tried to plant. I tried to water. I tried to fertilize and see grow and become trees that had branches with buds, and the buds, with God's help, who watered them and sprinkled sunshine along with that water, and those buds grew into flowers. And then God blew those flowers that had seeds, and those seeds spread from coast to coast and shore to shore. And time again, I watched those seeds end hunger. That's a perfect example of it. Today, I was responsible for starting the End Hunger Network, which was then adopted by the Houston Food Bank, which is today the largest in the United States, and other cities throughout the country are emulating it and trying to do the same thing to feed more people than ever before. Planting seeds is important. And we also, I don't think any city is immune from police brutality. On occasion, I don't think it's a daily occurrence. But we happened to have an incident which was equally as bad as we read about, hear about, and watch on TV, when 3 errant policemen took a Latin American, a Hispanic man, out of prison, handcuffed him behind his back. Did you hear what I just said? Behind his back, handcuffed, walked him down out of the jail over to the river, which runs right in front of the police department, threw him into the river. What happened? Of course, he died. And they're pulling him out of the river, and the newspapers and the TV is there snapping pictures, and the city goes wild. And typically what happens after that, the mayor fires the police chief, and they hire a new police chief. The new police chief was a big bulk of a strong man, sent out a request for proposal to every advertising agency, change the image. That arrived in my office, and the guys open it up, and they come running into my office, and they say, "Earl, we're not going to do it. We hate the police." And what taught me in the military career, you don't accept that answer. And I said, now shut up. It is our responsibility, our duty, to correct that problem. Go back, come up with a program. So they came back each morning and showed me something, and I said, Uh-uh. That doesn't make me love a cop. Uh-uh. Doesn't make me love a cop. Uh-uh. Time and time again until I finally was ready to scream and yell. But I'm at home at night watching TV, and you've seen that commercial. It shows African American little boys, little girls, and the announcer says they're hungry. If you want to help them, send a donation. That donation can change their lives. I wrote something down on my little pad, and I ran in the morning and I called in the creative people and I said, I want a billboard, dark blue, like the uniforms a police officer wears, and in big, bold letters, in white, bold letters that say, the badge means you care. And on the right, a silver badge, a police badge. Anybody know anyone who has a police badge, a friend? They said, Earl, your secretary is dating a police officer. So I ran into Carol and I said, Carol, could you call your friend that you're dating and ask him to come by? We'd like to shoot a photo of his badge. And she said, incidentally, Earl, we're going out to dinner tonight, and he's coming by to pick me up. Ask him to come in. She did that. Didn't take very long. And this handsome young man who looked like the epitome of a police officer, and I told him what we wanted. He took off the badge. We put him in our photography room. He stood there. We shot the picture, put his badge back on, and then he went out to work with Carol first to get dinner. Then he dropped her off at her apartment and went out into one of our most difficult neighborhoods. Knocked on the door as they're climbing up to the second story, knocked on the wooden door and announced, Houston Police Department, DEA Division. And he's standing in front of the wooden door, and the response was a shotgun blast through the wooden door, hit him straight in the chest and his heart, and the officer tumbled down from the second floor into a pool of his own blood on the first floor where he died. Well, within a week, we were making our presentation to the new police chief. As I mentioned, a big bulk of a man. He sat at one end of the table and I was at the other, and I was giving the presentation. And in those years, we didn't have fancy, broadcast things. All I had was that poster with a paper on it. And I said, sir, we're going to show you how we think we can change what is going on, this hatred and discrimination. And I flipped that sheet of paper over and read, the badge means you care. And I saw that police chief looking at each one of the 8 officers in the room, and they were all nodding their head in unison. And he said, Earl, who wrote that? And when he spoke in that intimidating voice, I began to shake. And I said, somebody back at the office, sir. And he said, you go back and tell that somebody that's exactly what we want. He then turned to one of the officers sitting there, hire Earl's agency. And then he looked at me and he said, I want 2,500 of those bumper stickers on my desk this week. And he walked out crying. I looked at the police officers and I said, did you see Chief Bond walking out crying? And I said, did I say something wrong? Earl, the officer you buried, or we buried, that was killed, was Officer Jim Kilty. I said, oh my God, I didn't realize that. And we are so upset. But I must say, to the heaven above and said, God, please take Offset into your loving care. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my time is up. I just want to say, I read that letter on purpose to you, that a grandson who I rarely see, Denver is not around the corner, took the time to express what he has thought about his grandfather. And my wish is that someday you millennials will grow up, be married, have children, and that you are setting an example by serving others, that they will remember, and maybe in their lives they will follow that example and make this world a better place. Now, I'm just going to ask one question before I say thank you and goodbye. Can one man change the world? You're probably shaking, no way. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. One woman can change the world. Her name, Rosa Parks, a little, very small black lady, refused to get into the back of the bus and said, I'm sitting here where I belong. And from that little lady, what I told you about earlier, about the separation of the whites and the blacks, changed. You and I together can change the world. We'll start right here in America. And our program, I wish I had more time, but I'll give you my partner's message. My partner, and don't laugh, he speaks to me during the night when I think I'm asleep, and he'll say something like, Earl, there's a crisis in America. You have the solution. No more need be said. I tap Natalie on her shoulder and I say, Natalie, he has given me a command. And I knew, without him telling me, that it would be his most sacred command. The most sacred command in both the Old and New Testament is love thy neighbor, and your neighbor will love you too. You and I, working together, will introduce, and convince every one of the 300 million Americans that they will participate and actively get involved in our program to establish love thy neighbor. Only what it means, you don't have to marry that neighbor, but to care, have compassion and respect for whatever your color is, whatever your faith is, wherever you came from, whichever country. We are all God's children. And with that, I'm almost at the very end of my words. As God's children, we all look different. We have different skin colors. We have different sizes. We're thin, we're thick. Some can run faster than others. Some are more talented than things. But remember, God did it on purpose. He wanted us to be unique, different from one another, so that we can be great and better together. I want you to email Earl at backourvets.com. Earl at backourvets.com. and say, Earl, we want to help. Join, love thy neighbor. And I'll fill you in how easy it can be done. And you will even have an opportunity not only to change minds, but to maybe put some money in your pocket. Thank you so much for listening to me. And remember what my grandson said. People are watching you daily. And remember, your acts, especially of kindness, goodness, caring, and compassion, will make a difference. God bless you all.